Imagine being trapped in a place so cold that even polar bears avoided a prison where temperatures drop to a bone-chilling -50°C, where the icy wind cuts through the thickest layers, and survival becomes a daily battle. Welcome to Russia's Polar Owl Prison, one of the most remote and feared penal colonies in the world. This is where Russia sends its most dangerous criminals, not just to punish them, but to make them suffer in ways you can hardly imagine. One prisoner tried to escape once. He thought he could outsmart the guards, but as he ran through the snow, the cold bit into his skin, and his body started to shut down. Before he could make it past the prison walls, he collapsed, frozen solid, like a statue of failure. No one ever tried to escape again. Inside, the prisoners are trapped in tiny cells, shivering in thin clothes, with nothing but the sound of their own chattering teeth to keep them company. There's no warmth, no hope, and no escape. The endless winter outside matches the darkness in their hearts. Even the toughest criminals break down here, wishing for an end that never comes. As we go deeper into the story of this prison, you'll discover why even the worst of the worst fear the cold grip of Russia's Owl Prison. Deep in the Arctic Circle lies a place most people have never heard of. A prison so isolated and cold that it's almost forgotten by the world. This is Russia's Owl Prison, also known as Polar Owl Prison. The prison is officially called Penal Colony No. 18, and it's one of the most feared places in the Russian prison system. The prison is located in the far north, where temperatures drop to 50°C, and the sun disappears for months during the long winter. Getting to the prison is not easy. It's a journey that starts with a train ride from Moscow, a journey that takes over 2 days. Once the train reaches the last station, the journey isn't over yet. Prisoners are then loaded onto buses, and they travel for hours through snow-covered roads, surrounded by nothing but ice and darkness. The journey itself is a reminder of just how far away from civilization the prisoners are being taken. The prison is surrounded by thick walls, and it's almost impossible to escape. The prisoners are locked in small cells with no heating, just thin clothes to protect them from the biting cold. The walls of the cells are made of concrete, and they're so cold that touching them feels like touching ice. Inside the prison, life is harsh and unforgiving. The prisoners are forced to stand for hours, with no chance to sit or lie down during the day. The only time they can rest is when the lights go out at night, and even then, the cold makes it hard to sleep. The prison's location makes it almost impossible for prisoners to escape. The Arctic wilderness is a deadly place, with snow and ice stretching for miles in every direction. Even if a prisoner managed to get past the guards and the walls, they would still have to survive the freezing temperatures and the harsh landscape. The cold is so intense that it can kill within hours, and there's no shelter, no food, no help out there. The daily routine in the prison is monotonous and grueling. The prisoners wake up early in the morning and they're immediately put to work. There's no time to rest, no time to think. They're given tasks that are repetitive and mind-numbing, designed to break their spirits. The work is hard, and the cold makes it even harder. Their hands and feet are numb from the cold, and every movement is painful. But they have no choice, they have to keep working, or they'll be punished. The prisoners are allowed to go outside for a short time each day, but even this is a form of punishment. They're taken to a small, enclosed yard, where they have to stand in the cold, surrounded by high walls. There's no escape from the cold, no chance to warm up. The wind howls through the yard, and the cold bites at their skin. The prisoners are forced to stand still with no movement allowed. If anyone tries to move, they're punished. The guards watch them closely, ready to strike at the first sign of disobedience. The prisoners in Polar Owl Prison are not ordinary criminals. They are the most dangerous, the most feared, the most hated people in Russia. They are murderers, terrorists, rapists, and cannibals, sent here to serve life sentences for their horrific crimes. But in this prison, their crimes are not the only things that haunt them. The cold, the isolation, the despair, they all take their toll, slowly breaking down even the toughest inmates. One of the most notorious inmates in Polar Owl Prison is Alexander Pushkin, known as the chessboard killer. He was a serial killer who terrorized Moscow, killing dozens of people in a twisted game. He wanted to kill enough people to fill every square on a chessboard, and he almost succeeded. But when he was finally caught, he was sentenced to life in Polar Owl Prison. At first, Pushkin was defiant, showing no remorse for his crimes, but the cold and the isolation slowly wore him down. The man who once boasted about his killings now shivers in his cell, broken by the relentless cold. He rarely speaks, and when he does, it's to beg for mercy, to ask for death to take him. Another infamous inmate is Hasha Kulov, a terrorist responsible for one of the deadliest attacks in Russian history. He was part of a group that took over a school in Beslan, leading to the deaths of hundreds of children and teachers. Kuliev was the only member of the group to survive the attack, and he was sentenced to life in Polar Owl Prison. His cell is so small that he can barely move, and the cold is so intense that it feels like it's crushing him. He spends his days in silence, staring at the walls with no hope of escape. The man who once caused so much fear is now just another prisoner, broken by the cold and the isolation. Ivan Anatolich is another name that sends shivers down the spines of those who hear it. He was a serial killer who went on a killing spree during the winter of 2006 to 2007, murdering 6 people in a matter of weeks. When he was caught, he was sentenced to life in Polar Owl Prison. The cold and the isolation drove him to madness, and in 2016, he took his own life. His body was buried in the frozen ground outside the prison, just another grave among the hundreds that lined the prison's cemetery. His death was a reminder to the other prisoners of the fate that awaits them, a fate worse than death. But not all prisoners in Polar Owl are killers. Some are there for political reasons, sent to prison for opposing the government or speaking out against corruption. These prisoners are often kept in the same conditions as the murderers and terrorists, locked away in freezing cells with no contact with the outside world. The cold doesn't discriminate, it breaks everyone, no matter what their crime was. The prison is filled with stories like these, stories of men who were once feared and powerful, now reduced to shivering, broken shells of their former selves. In the prison, there's no sense of time. The days blend into each other with the constant cold and the monotony of the routine. The prisoners wake up at the same time every day, go through the same motions, and fall asleep in the same freezing cells. There's no variation, no change, nothing to look forward to. The lack of stimulation and the constant cold eat away at their sanity. The prisoners often lose track of the days, weeks, and even years. Time loses its meaning in a place where nothing ever changes. The only relief from the isolation is the rare interactions with other prisoners, but even these are limited and filled with tension. The prisoners are forbidden to speak to each other, and any communication is done in secret, with the constant fear of being caught by the guards. For those who manage to survive, the psychological toll of life in Polar Owl Prison is immense. The constant cold, the isolation, and the harsh treatment from the guards wear down their mental health. Many prisoners develop severe depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses. Life in Polar Owl Prison follows a strict routine that is designed to break the spirits of the inmates. The prisoners are expected to follow orders without question, and any disobedience is met with swift and harsh punishment. The day begins early, at the crack of dawn. The prisoners are woken up by the loud clang of a bell, signaling the start of the day. The cold hits them immediately as they leave their thin blankets and get out of bed. The prisoners know that any delay or hesitation will result in a beating, so they move quickly, their breath visible in the freezing air. Breakfast is a quick and joyless affair. The prisoners are given a bowl of thin, cold porridge and a piece of stale bread. The guards watch over them as they eat, making sure there is no talking, no interaction between the inmates. The prisoners eat quickly, knowing that they have only a few minutes before they are marched out to begin their day's work. The work assignments in Polar Owl Prison are as monotonous as they are grueling. The prisoners are tasked with jobs that require physical labor, such as breaking rocks, shoveling snow, or carrying heavy loads. The cold makes the work even harder, as their muscles ache and their fingers go numb. There is no respite, no breaks to rest and warm up. The work continues for hours, with the prisoners moving mechanically, their minds numb from the cold and the monotony. The prisoners are also subjected to psychological torture, a constant barrage of tactics designed to break their will. One of the most effective forms of psychological torture in Polar Owl Prison is the use of solitary confinement. Prisoners who break the rules or who are deemed a threat are placed in tiny, windowless cells where they are left alone for days, weeks, or even months. The isolation is complete, with no human contact, no light, and no sound. The prisoner is left alone with their thoughts, with nothing to distract them from the cold and the darkness. As the day wears on, the prisoners are given a brief break for lunch, but it is no more comforting than breakfast. The food is cold and tasteless, and the prisoners eat quickly, knowing that their work is not yet done. The afternoon is a repeat of the morning, with more hard labor, more cold, more silence. The prisoners' bodies ache from the work, their minds are numb from the monotony, but they have no choice but to continue. The guards are relentless, pushing them to keep going, to work harder, to endure more. By the time the day is over, the prisoners are exhausted, their bodies and minds pushed to the limit. They are allowed a few minutes to wash up before dinner, but the water is freezing, and the facilities are rudimentary. There is no comfort, no warmth, no privacy. Dinner is a simple meal, similar to the others, and the prisoners eat in silence, knowing that the day is almost over. After dinner, the prisoners are marched back to their cells, where they are locked in for the night. The cells are small and cold, with just enough space for a bed and a toilet. The prisoners are given a thin blanket, but it does little to ward off the cold. As the lights go out, the cold settles in, making sleep difficult, if not impossible. The prisoners lie in their beds shivering, trying to find some warmth under their thin blankets. The cold is relentless, making it hard to rest. The silence in the prison at night is eerie, with only the sound of the wind howling outside and the occasional cough or groan from a neighboring cell. The prisoners are left alone with their thoughts, their minds racing with memories of their crimes, regrets, and the hopelessness of their situation. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and uneasy. The cold wakes them throughout the night, and the hard bed offers no comfort. Some prisoners try to stay awake as long as they can, fearing the nightmares that come with sleep. The nightmares are vivid and terrifying, filled with images of their crimes, the faces of their victims, and the overwhelming sense of being trapped with no way out. The cold seeps into their dreams, turning them into endless, freezing landscapes where there is no escape. The morning comes too soon, with the harsh sound of the bells signaling the start of another day. The routine repeats, the same as the day before and the day before that. There is no change, no hope of anything different. The days blur together, each one as cold and bleak as the last. For some, the only way out is death. The cold, the isolation, and the harsh conditions take their toll, and many prisoners do not survive their sentences. But even in death, there is no escape from the cold. The ground in the cemetery is so frozen that it's difficult to dig graves, and the bodies are often buried in shallow pits, covered with just enough earth to keep them from the surface. The cold preserves the bodies, leaving them as a grim reminder of the fate that awaits all who enter Polar Owl Prison. The prisoners know that when their time comes, they too will be buried in the frozen earth, their bodies left to freeze in the cold ground, just as they were left to freeze in life. The guards, hardened by their own experiences in the prison, show little compassion for the dying. They see it as just another part of the job, another prisoner who couldn't handle the cold. The dead are removed from their cells with little ceremony, their bodies taken to the cemetery and buried quickly, with no markers to indicate who lies beneath the frozen earth. The prisoners know that when they die, they will be forgotten, just another name on a list, another body in the ground. The prison is a place of despair, where hope is a distant memory and the future holds nothing but more of the same. The prisoners know that they will never leave, that they will die in this frozen hell, forgotten by the world. The cold, the isolation, and the relentless routine are their only companions, and they offer no comfort. Life in Polar Owl Prison is a slow death, a death by degrees, where the cold and the darkness consume everything. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, the prisoners at Polar Owl Prison slowly come to terms with the reality of their situation. There is no escape, no hope of release, and no end to the suffering. The cold is constant, unyielding, and the isolation is absolute. The prisoners are left with nothing but their thoughts, their regrets, and the knowledge that they will never leave this place alive. The routine continues day after day with no change, no variation. The prisoners go through the motions, their spirits broken, their will to fight gone. They wake up, work, eat, and sleep, all in the same cold, unchanging environment. The cold has become a part of them, seeping into their bones, their minds, their souls. It's a constant reminder of their fate, a fate they cannot escape.